The gunshot that killed Thorne Carlyle's horse echoed across the Montana plains like a death knell, and as his faithful companion collapsed beneath him, he knew his luck had finally run out. The year was 1876, and Thorne had been riding hard for 3 days straight, trying to outrun a gang of rustlers who believed he had stolen their cattle. He hadn't, but explaining that to men who shot first and asked questions never seemed like a waste of breath. The fall from his dying horse knocked the wind from his lungs, and he hit the hard, packed earth with enough force to see stars dancing across his vision. His rifle flew from his grip, landing somewhere in the tall grass that stretched endlessly in every direction. Pain radiated through his shoulder and ribs as he scrambled to his feet, knowing the rustlers would be upon him any moment. His horse, a bay mare named Dancer, lay still in the dirt, her eyes already glazing over. He had no time to mourn her. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, and Thorne ran, his long legs carrying him through the grassland toward a line of cottonwood trees that promised cover and maybe, if God was feeling generous, a way out of this mess. The trees opened into a narrow valley, and Thorne pushed himself harder, his breath coming in ragged gasps. His dark hair, long enough to touch his collar, was plastered to his forehead with sweat despite the cool September air. At 26 years old, he had survived more close calls than most men twice his age, but something about this one felt different. More final. He burst through a thicket of brush and nearly collided with the weathered walls of a cabin. It stood in a small clearing, half hidden by overgrown vegetation, and looking like it had been forgotten by time itself. The wood was gray with age, and several of the window shutters hung at odd angles. It appeared abandoned, which made it perfect. Thorne didn't hesitate. He crashed through the door, his hand instinctively reaching for the Colt at his hip as he prepared to clear the space. What he found instead stopped him dead in his tracks. A woman stood in the center of the single room, a cast-iron skillet raised above her head like a weapon, her green eyes blazing with a mixture of fear and determination. She wore a simple cotton dress that had seen better days, and her auburn hair hung in a braid over her shoulder. She was young, probably no more than 22 or 23, and pretty in a way that seemed out of place in this forgotten corner of Montana. "Get out," she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. "I have already survived one man trying to take what is mine. I will not hesitate to split your skull open." Thorne raised his hands, showing her his empty palms. "Madam, I mean you no harm. There are men chasing me and I need somewhere to hide, just for a moment. Then I will be gone and you will never see me again." She did not lower the skillet. "Why are they chasing you? They think I stole from them. I did not. And I am supposed to believe you." The hoofbeats were getting closer. Thorne could hear voices now, rough men calling to each other as they searched. "Madam, please, if they find me, they will kill me. And if they find you here alone." He left the sentence unfinished, but the implication hung heavy in the air. Something in her expression shifted, a flicker of understanding or maybe just resignation. She lowered the skillet slightly. "The cellar. There is a door under that rug." She pointed to a worn piece of fabric near the cold fireplace. Thorne moved quickly, pulling back the rug to reveal a wooden trapdoor. He lifted it and found a dark space below, barely large enough for a man to fit. He looked back at the woman. "Thank you." "Do not thank me yet," she said, already moving to replace the rug as he descended into the darkness. "If they search this place, you are on your own." The trapdoor closed above him, and Thorne found himself in complete blackness. The cellar smelled of earth and old potatoes, and he could barely sit up without hitting his head on the floor joists above. He heard the woman moving around above him, and then came the sound he had been dreading. heavy boots on the cabin's porch, followed by a fist pounding on the door. "Open up in there." Thorne held his breath, his hand on his Colt even though drawing it would be useless in this confined space. He heard the door creak open. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The woman's voice had changed, becoming softer, more nervous. She was playing a role. "We are looking for a man," a gravelly voice said. "Dark hair, tall, wearing a brown duster. You seen anyone like that?" "No, sir. I have been here all day tending to my garden and such. I have not seen anyone." "You live here alone?" A pause. "My husband is out hunting. He should be back any time now." "That's so. Mind if we look around?" "I would prefer you did not. This is my home." Thorne heard footsteps above him, heavy and deliberate. Someone was walking through the cabin, searching. His muscles tensed, ready to fight if it came to that, though he knew the odds would not be in his favor. "Ain't much here," another voice said. "Just a woman living in a dump." "Where's your husband's rifle, his gear?" Another pause, longer this time. "He took it with him, for the hunting." "Mighty convenient." "I do not see how my husband's hunting habits concern you gentlemen. Now, if you have finished looking around my home without permission, I would appreciate it if you left." There was steel in her voice now, and Thorne found himself impressed despite the danger of his situation. She was either very brave or very foolish, talking to armed men like that. "We will be on our way," the gravelly voice said. "But if you see that man we are looking for, you keep your mouth shut about us being here. Understand?" "I understand that I want you off my property." Laughter, cruel and mocking. "You got spirit, girl. Shame you are stuck out here in the middle of nowhere. A pretty thing like you could do well in town. Get out." More laughter, but finally, blessedly, the sound of boots retreating. The door closed and Thorne waited, counting his heartbeats. He forced himself to stay still for what felt like an eternity before the trapdoor finally opened above him. The woman's face appeared, framed by the afternoon light filtering through the cabin's grimy windows. "They are gone. I watched them ride north." Thorne climbed out of the cellar, his joints protesting after being cramped in such a small space. He replaced the rug carefully and then turned to face his savior. Up close, he could see that she was even younger than he had first thought, with a dusting of freckles across her nose and dark circles under her eyes that spoke of hard living and harder nights. "I owe you my life," he said simply. She shrugged, setting the skillet back on the table. "Maybe, or maybe I just saved you from a beating. Hard to say with men like that. They would have killed me, probably." She moved to the window, peering out at the empty landscape. "You should go soon, before they decide to circle back." "I will." But Thorne made no move toward the door. Instead, he found himself studying the cabin more carefully. It was small and spare, with a bed in one corner, a table and 2 chairs, a fireplace, and not much else. There were signs of recent habitation. A pot of something sitting cold in the fireplace, a few vegetables on the table, a blanket folded neatly on the bed. But there were also signs of neglect and disrepair. Holes in the roof that had been stuffed with rags, cracks in the walls where the wind whistled through, a door that no longer hung straight on its hinges. "You really live here alone?" he asked. Her jaw tightened. "That is none of your concern." "You said you had a husband," I lied. "Obviously." She turned from the window to face him, her arms crossed over her chest. "Look, you seem like a decent enough man despite being chased by rustlers, but I do not know you and I do not trust you. So I would appreciate it if you would take your gratitude and your questions and leave." Thorne nodded slowly. "Fair enough. But before I go, let me at least introduce myself properly. My name is Thorne Carlyle. I work as a ranch hand, or I did until last week when those men decided I was responsible for their missing cattle." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to reciprocate. Finally, she sighed. Nora Jenkins, Miss Jenkins or Mrs. Jenkins, Miss. Though that hardly matters out here. How long have you been living in this cabin, Miss Jenkins? Why do you care? Because, Thorne said carefully, this cabin looks like it has been abandoned for years, and you look like you have been barely surviving. And I am curious about what would drive a young woman to live alone in the middle of nowhere, in a place that is falling apart around her. Nora's expression hardened. My reasons are my own, and you said you were leaving. I did say that. Thorne moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the latch. Thank you again, Miss Jenkins. I truly am grateful. You are welcome. Try not to get shot. He smiled despite himself. I will do my best. Thorne stepped out onto the porch and immediately scanned the horizon for any sign of the rustlers. The sun was starting to sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. He had no horse, no supplies beyond what he carried on his belt, and no clear plan for what to do next. The nearest town was Beaver, a small settlement about 15 miles south, but he would never make it on foot before dark. And traveling at night in this country was asking to break an ankle or walk into a bear. Behind him, he heard Nora close the cabin door, followed by the sound of a bar being dropped into place. She was locking him out, which was smart. He was a stranger, after all, and this was dangerous country for a woman alone. Thorne started walking, choosing a direction at random. He made it maybe 100 yards before he stopped, looking back at the cabin. Something about the whole situation did not sit right with him. A young woman, living alone in an abandoned cabin with barely enough supplies to survive. No husband, no family that he could see. Just her and that cast iron skillet and a determination that seemed both admirable and heartbreaking. It was not his problem. He had his own troubles to worry about. But still, he found himself thinking about the holes in the roof and the cold fireplace, and the way her hands had trembled even as her voice stayed steady. Thorne cursed under his breath and turned back toward the cabin. Nora did not look surprised when she opened the door to his knocking. If anything, she looked resigned. What do you want now? Your roof has holes in it, Thorne said, and winter is coming. You will freeze to death up here when the snows start. I have survived one winter already. I will survive another. Maybe, but you do not have to just survive. He gestured at the cabin. Let me help you fix this place up. I am good with my hands and I have nowhere else to be at the moment. Nora stared at him like he had lost his mind. You want to repair my cabin? Yes. Why? Because you saved my life, and because it is the right thing to do. I do not need your charity. It is not charity, it is payment for a debt. Thorne met her gaze steadily. Let me help you, Miss Jenkins, please. She was quiet for a long time, and Thorne could see the internal struggle playing out across her face. Pride versus practicality. Independence versus need. Finally, she stepped back from the door. You can sleep in the shed out back. It is not much, but it will keep the rain off. And if you try anything at all, I will shoot you. I do have a rifle and I know how to use it. Understood? And you work for food and shelter, nothing more. I cannot pay you. I do not expect payment, she nodded curtly. Fine. The shed is around the back. There is a pump near the garden if you need water. Supper is at sundown and you get 1 meal a day. Thank you, Miss Jenkins. Thank me by fixing my roof, and stop calling me Miss Jenkins. It makes me feel old. Nora is fine. Nora, Thorne repeated, liking the way her name felt on his tongue. Then you should call me Thorne. She did not respond, just closed the door in his face. But Thorne was smiling as he made his way around the cabin to find the shed. It was little more than 4 walls and a slanted roof, filled with old tools and rusty equipment, but it was shelter. He cleared a space in the corner, spreading his bedroll on the dirt floor, and settled in for the night. As darkness fell and the temperature dropped, Thorne lay awake listening to the sounds of the Montana wilderness. Coyotes yipped in the distance, and the wind rustled through the grass like whispered secrets. He thought about Nora, alone in that cabin, barring the door against the night and the world. He wondered what her story was, what had brought her to this lonely place, and he found himself determined to find out. The next morning, Thorne was awakened by the sound of the cabin door opening. He sat up, rubbing sleep from his eyes, and saw Nora emerge with a bucket in one hand. She wore the same dress as yesterday, and her hair was tied back with a simple ribbon. She saw him watching and nodded once before heading toward the garden. Thorne got up and followed her, keeping a respectful distance. The garden was small and struggling, with a few stubborn vegetables clinging to life despite the approaching cold. Nora knelt in the dirt and began pulling weeds with efficient, practiced movements. "What do you need me to start with?" Thorne asked. "There are some old shingles in the shed. See if any of them are still good. The worst holes are on the north side of the roof." Thorne spent the morning sorting through the debris in the shed, finding a surprising amount of usable materials. Someone had built this cabin with care once upon a time, using good wood and solid construction. It had just been neglected for too long. As he worked, he caught glimpses of Nora moving around the property, tending her garden, feeding the chickens he had not noticed the day before, hauling water from the pump. Around midday, he climbed onto the roof with a hammer and nails he had found in the shed. The view from up there was breathtaking. Endless grassland rolling away to distant mountains, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. He could see why someone might choose to live out here, away from towns and people and all the complications that came with civilization. He was prying loose a damaged shingle when Nora called up to him. "There is water in the bucket by the pump. You should drink before you get heat stroke." "Thank you," Thorne called back. He climbed down and found the bucket she had mentioned, the water cool and sweet. Nora was back in her garden and he joined her there, crouching down a few rows away. "How long has this cabin been here?" he asked. "About 10 years, I think. A trapper built it, but he died one winter. After that, it just sat empty. How did you find it?" Nora was quiet for a moment, her hands still in the dirt. "I was running away. From a town called Virginia City, about 3 days' ride from here. I had been working as a seamstress, but—" She trailed off and Thorne did not push. "I needed to leave. I rode until my horse went lame, and then I walked until I found this place. That was 18 months ago, and you have been here alone all that time." "Yes. That must be hard," she shrugged. "It is better than the alternative." Thorne wanted to ask what the alternative was, but he sensed that Nora had already shared more than she intended. Instead, he said, "These vegetables will not last much longer. Do you have supplies put by for winter?" "Some. I have been preserving what I can. It might not be enough. I know." There was defeat in her voice just for a moment before she straightened her shoulders. "But I will manage. I always do." They worked in silence for a while, and Thorne found the quiet companionable rather than awkward. There was something peaceful about this place, despite its isolation. Or maybe because of it. That evening, Nora made a simple supper of beans and cornbread, and they ate together at her small table. It was strange, sitting across from this woman he barely knew, sharing a meal like they were old friends. But it also felt right in a way Thorne could not quite explain. "The roof should be watertight by tomorrow," he said. "After that, I can start on the walls. There are some gaps that need sealing before winter. You do not have to stay that long, I know, but I want to." Nora looked at him, her green eyes searching his face. "Why? You could be halfway to Beaver by now. Instead, you are here, fixing up a stranger's cabin for no good reason." "Maybe I like having a reason to stay in one place," Thorne said. I have been drifting for a long time. It is nice to have a purpose, even if it is just patching holes." "Is that really all it is?" Thorne met her gaze. "I do not know yet." Something passed between them in that moment, an understanding or acknowledgement of the connection forming. Nora looked away first, standing up to clear the dishes. "You should get some sleep. Morning comes early." Thorne returned to the shed, but sleep was slow to come. He lay in the darkness, thinking about green eyes and auburn hair and the way Nora's hands moved when she worked in the garden. He barely knew her, and yet he felt drawn to her in a way that was both exciting and terrifying. He had never been one for settling down, had always preferred the freedom of the open trail. But something about Nora and her lonely cabin was making him reconsider everything he thought he wanted. The days fell into a rhythm. Thorne worked on the cabin, repairing the roof, sealing the walls, fixing the door so it hung straight. Nora tended her garden and did whatever mysterious tasks occupied her time. They shared meals and conversation, gradually learning each other's stories. Thorne told her about growing up in Texas, about losing his parents to fever when he was 17, about the years spent drifting from ranch to ranch, never staying long enough to put down roots. Nora was more guarded, but bit by bit, her story emerged. She had been engaged to a man in Virginia City, a merchant who seemed respectable. But after the engagement was announced, he had changed, becoming controlling and violent. When she tried to break it off, he had threatened her, saying he owned her now and she would marry him whether she wanted to or not. "So I left," Nora said one evening as they sat on the cabin's newly repaired porch, watching the sun set. "I took what money I had saved and bought a horse and just rode. I did not have a plan, I just knew I could not stay there. And he never came looking for you. If he did, he never found this place. I have been careful not to go into Beaver too often, and when I do, I keep my head down and do not talk to anyone. That is no way to live. It is better than being married to a man who would have beaten me every time I spoke out of turn." Thorne felt anger rise in his chest at the thought of anyone treating Nora that way. "If he ever shows up here, you let me know. I will make sure he understands that you are not his property." Nora smiled, a real smile that lit up her whole face. "My hero. I am serious. I know you are. And I appreciate it, but I can take care of myself. I know you can, but that does not mean you have to." They sat in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue. Stars began to emerge, more than Thorne had ever seen in his life, scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "I never get tired of this," Nora said softly. "The stars. They are the same every night, constant. Everything else in life changes and falls apart, but the stars are always there." "They are beautiful," Thorne agreed, though he was looking at her rather than the sky. She caught him watching and blushed, turning her face away. "You should get some rest. You have been working hard. So have you." "It is my home. I am supposed to work hard." "It is starting to feel like my home too," Thorne said before he could stop himself. Nora stood abruptly. "Good night, Thorne." "Good night, Nora." He watched her retreat into the cabin and he cursed himself for pushing too hard too fast. But the truth was, this place did feel like home, more than anywhere else he had ever been. And it was not just the cabin or the land, it was her. A week passed, then two. The cabin transformed under Thorne's care, becoming weathertight and solid. He built new shutters for the windows and repaired the chimney so smoke would draw properly. He fixed the pump and reinforced the shed. With each improvement, he saw Nora relax a little more, the constant tension in her shoulders easing. They were working together in the garden one afternoon when Nora suddenly asked, "What will you do when the cabin is finished?" Thorne sat back on his heels, considering the question. "I do not know. I suppose I should move on, find work somewhere. There is a ranch about 20 miles east of here. The owner is a decent man named Samuel Hartford. He might be hiring. That is good to know. Or, Nora said carefully, not meeting his eyes, you could stay here, help me with the place. It is too much for one person, really. And winter will be hard. Having someone else here would make things easier. Thorne's heart beat faster. Are you asking me to stay? I am saying that if you wanted to stay, I would not object, for practical reasons. Practical reasons. Yes, purely practical, Thorne grinned. Well, in that case, I suppose I could stay, purely for practical reasons. Nora finally looked at him, and there was a softness in her eyes that had not been there before. Good. That is settled then. But of course, it was not settled. The question of what they were to each other hung between them, unspoken but increasingly present. They were not married, not even courting in any formal sense, but they lived together, worked together, ate together. They knew each other's habits and rhythms. Thorne knew that Nora sang to herself when she thought he could not hear, and that she always checked the door 3 times before bed. Nora knew that Thorne had nightmares sometimes, and that he was partial to coffee strong enough to strip paint. One evening in early October, Thorne rode into Beaver to buy supplies. He had been careful to stay away from town until now, worried that the rustlers might still be looking for him. But winter was coming fast, and they needed things Nora could not make or grow: flour, salt, coffee, ammunition. Beaver was a small town, just a main street with a general store, a saloon, a church, and a handful of houses. Thorne kept his hat pulled low, and his head down as he tied his borrowed horse, an aging gelding that belonged to the previous tenant of the cabin, and had been living half wild in the valley outside the general store. Inside, the proprietor was a heavy-set man with mutton chops and a suspicious expression. "Help you? I need supplies," Thorne said, handing over the list Nora had written out in careful script, "and I am paying in cash." The man's expression softened at the mention of cash. He gathered the items, packing them into burlap sacks while keeping up a running commentary about the weather and the upcoming winter and the price of goods these days. "You new to the area?" he asked as he tallied up the total. "Just passing through," Thorne said, which was not exactly a lie. "Staying anywhere local, here and there?" The man gave him a knowing look. "If you are looking for work, Samuel Hartford is hiring at his ranch. Good man, fair wages. I will keep that in mind." Thorne paid and was loading the supplies onto his horse when a voice behind him made his blood run cold. "Well, well, look what we have here." He turned slowly and found himself facing 3 men. He recognized them immediately, the rustlers who had chased him to Nora's cabin. They were older than him, harder, with the kind of mean eyes that came from years of violent living. The one who had spoken, a tall man with a scar across his cheek, stepped closer. "You got a lot of nerve showing your face around here, horse thief." "I am not a horse thief," Thorne said evenly. "And I think you know that. What I know is that my cousin's horses went missing around the same time you were working his ranch, and I know you ran when we tried to ask you about it. I ran because you were shooting at me, because you were running." The man spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Guilty conscience, seems to me." Thorne was acutely aware of the gun at his hip, and of the fact that these 3 men were also armed. A shootout in the middle of Beaver's main street would not end well for anyone, least of all him. "I did not take your cousin's horses," Thorne said. "But I can see that talking is not going to change your mind. So what do you want?" "I want my money back. $200 for the horses we lost." "I do not have $200. Then I guess we have a problem." Before Thorne could respond, another voice cut through the tension. "Is there a problem here, gentlemen?" A man had emerged from the general store, tall and gray-haired with a sheriff's star pinned to his vest. He looked between Thorne and the rustlers with the weary expression of someone who had broken up too many fights. The scarred man smiled, but it did not reach his eyes. "No problem, Sheriff. Just talking to an old friend." Looked like more than talking from where I was standing. "You boys know I do not tolerate trouble in my town." "We were just leaving, Sheriff Carter." "Good idea." The sheriff turned to Thorne. "You got a name, son?" "Thorne Carlyle, sir." "You live around here, Mr. Carlyle?" "I am staying at a cabin north of town, working on repairs." "That old trapper's cabin, I thought that place was abandoned." "Not anymore." Sheriff Carter nodded slowly. "Well, Mr. Carlyle, I suggest you finish loading up your supplies and head back to your cabin. And you three," he glared at the rustlers, "find somewhere else to be. Now." The rustlers left, but not before the scarred man gave Thorne a look that promised this was not over. Thorne finished loading his horse with shaking hands, adrenaline making his movements clumsy. "Thank you, Sheriff," he said. "Do not thank me yet. Those boys are trouble and they do not let things go easy. You watch yourself out there." "I will." The ride back to the cabin felt twice as long as the ride into town. Thorne kept checking over his shoulder, expecting to see the rustlers following him. But the trail behind stayed empty, and eventually the cabin came into view. Nora was on the porch when he arrived, her face brightening when she saw him. "You were gone longer than I expected. I was starting to worry." "I ran into some trouble in town," Thorne said, dismounting and beginning to unload the supplies. "Those rustlers found me." All color drained from Nora's face. "Are you hurt?" "No." The sheriff broke it up before anything could happen. "But Nora, they are not going to let this go. They think I owe them money." "Do you?" "No, I did not steal those horses. But someone did, and they have decided I am responsible." Nora helped him carry the supplies inside, her movements quick and nervous. "What are you going to do?" "I do not know. If I leave, they might follow me to the next town. If I stay, they might come here." "Then stay." Nora set down a sack of flour and turned to face him. "Stay, and we will deal with whatever comes, together." "Nora, I do not want to bring trouble to your door. You already saved me from a life I could not bear. The least I can do is stand with you now." She moved closer, and Thorne found himself looking down into her determined eyes. "Besides, you said this place was starting to feel like home. I would like you to stay, not just for practical reasons." "No, no." She reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his rough beard. "I have been alone for a long time, Thorne. And then you showed up, running from trouble, and somehow you made everything better. This cabin, my life, me. Everything is better with you here, so please do not leave." Thorne covered her hand with his own, turning to press a kiss to her palm. "I am not going anywhere, not unless you want me to." "I do not want you to." They stood there for a long moment, the air between them charged with all the feelings they had been dancing around for weeks. Then Thorne leaned down and kissed her, soft and careful, giving her every chance to pull away. But Nora did not pull away. Instead, she wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back, and it felt like coming home when they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. Nora smiled. "I have wanted to do that for a while now." "Why did you not?" "I was afraid. Of moving too fast, of getting hurt again, of wanting something I could not have." "You can have me," Thorne said, "for as long as you want me. Be careful making promises like that. I might hold you to them." "I hope you do." They kissed again, slower this time, learning each other. When they finally pulled apart, the sun was setting, painting the cabin in golden light. Thorne felt something shift inside him, some rootless part of his soul finally settling down. "We should probably talk about what this means," Nora said, though she made no move to step out of his arms. "It means I am yours and you are mine if you want to be." "I want to be." She rested her head against his chest, and Thorne wrapped his arms around her, holding her close. "But Thorne, I need you to know something. I am not ready for marriage, not yet, maybe not for a long time. That man in Virginia City, he made me feel like marriage was a trap, a way for him to own me. I know not all men are like that, and I think I know you are not like that, but I still need time." "Then we will take time," Thorne said simply. "I am not going anywhere, Nora. We can move as slow as you need." "Thank you." They stood on the porch until the stars came out, holding each other and making quiet plans. They would need to prepare for the possibility that the rustlers might come looking. They would need to finish securing the cabin for winter. They would need to figure out how to live together, not just as housemates, but as something more. That night, Thorne moved his bedroll from the shed into the cabin. They kept separate sleeping spaces, Nora in her bed and Thorne by the fireplace, but there was comfort in not being separated by walls. As Thorne lay in the darkness listening to Nora's soft breathing, he found himself thinking about the word home and what it meant. For years, it had been just a concept, something other people had. But now, in this small cabin in the middle of Montana, with this stubborn, beautiful woman sleeping nearby, he was beginning to understand. Home was not a place. It was a person, and his person was Nora. The days grew shorter and colder as October turned to November. Thorne and Nora fell into a new rhythm, one that included stolen kisses while working and held hands during evening walks and quiet conversations by the fire. They were learning each other in a deeper way now, not just as friends or housemates, but as partners. Thorne learned that Nora had a wicked sense of humor when she was comfortable enough to let it show. He learned that she was scared of storms but would never admit it, and that she cried sometimes in the night for the family she had left behind in Virginia City. He learned that she was stronger than anyone he had ever met, with a core of iron that had kept her alive and sane through months of isolation. Nora learned that Thorne was gentler than his rough exterior suggested. She learned that he could not sing to save his life but hummed while he worked. She learned that he had nightmares about the day his parents died, and that the only thing that helped was talking about them, remembering the good times. She learned that he loved her with a quiet, steady devotion that made her believe in love again. They had just finished supper one evening when they heard horses approaching. Thorne was on his feet immediately, his hand on his gun as he moved to the window. 3 riders were coming up the valley, and even in the fading light he recognized them. "It is the rustlers," he said grimly. "Nora, get the rifle." She retrieved the Winchester from where it hung over the fireplace, her hand steady despite the fear in her eyes. "What do? We talk first. If that does not work, we fight." They went out onto the porch together, presenting a united front. The 3 rustlers dismounted and the scarred man stepped forward. "Evening," he said, his tone mockingly polite. "Nice place you got here, real cozy." "What do you want?" Thorne asked. "I want what I am owed. You cost me horses and money, and I aim to collect." "I did not take your horses." "How many times do I have to say it?" "Until you pay me $200, you can say it all you want. I still would not believe you." Nora stepped forward, the rifle cradled in her arms. "He does not have $200, and even if he did, why would he pay you for horses he did not steal?" The scarred man looked at her with interest. "And who might you be?" "Someone who will put a bullet between your eyes if you do not get off my property." The rustler laughed. "You hear that, boys? The lady is threatening us." "This is your last warning," Nora said, raising the rifle to her shoulder. "Leave. Now." For a moment, Thorne thought it might turn into a shootout. The tension was so thick he could feel it pressing against his skin. But then a new voice called out from the darkness. "I would listen to the lady if I were you." Everyone turned to see Sheriff Carter riding up the valley, flanked by 2 deputies. The lawmen were all armed and their hands rested casually on their weapons. "Sheriff," the scarred man said, his smile slipping, "this is not your concern. When 3 men ride out to a remote cabin to harass its occupants, it becomes my concern." Sheriff Carter dismounted, his movements deliberate and calm. "I did some checking after that incident in town. Talked to some people who know you, talked to the ranch where Mr. Carlyle used to work. You know what I found out? I do not care what you found out. I found out that Mr. Carlyle was 50 miles away when those horses were stolen. He was delivering supplies to a line camp, and there are 3 witnesses who can vouch for him. So whatever you think he did, you are wrong." The scarred man's jaw tightened. Someone stole those horses. Maybe they did, but it was not Mr. Carlyle, and I better not hear about you bothering him or Miss Jenkins again, because if I do, I will arrest you for harassment and threatening behavior. Do we understand each other? The rustlers exchanged glances. Finally, the scarred man spat into the dirt and mounted his horse. "This ain't over." "Yeah, it is," Sheriff Carter said. "You just do not know it yet. Now get." The rustlers rode off, and Thorne let out a breath he had not known he was holding. Nora lowered the rifle, her arms trembling now that the danger had passed. "Thank you, Sheriff," Thorne said. "How did you know to come out here?" "I did not. I came out here to tell you what I had learned about those horse thefts and to warn you that those boys might cause trouble." "Looks like I got here just in time. We appreciate it." Sheriff Carter nodded. "You two should be safe now. Those rustlers are cowards at heart. They only fight when they think they can win. Now that they know I am watching, they will leave you alone. Would you like to stay for coffee?" Nora asked. "It is the least we can offer after what you have done." "I appreciate that, Miss Jenkins, but I need to get back to town. You two take care of each other." They watched the sheriff and his deputies ride away, and then Thorne pulled Nora into his arms, holding her tight. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am now. That was terrifying. You were incredibly brave. I was incredibly scared. You can be both at the same time." They went back inside, and Thorne built up the fire while Nora made coffee with shaking hands. They sat close together on the small couch Thorne had repaired, Nora tucked under his arm, both of them gradually coming down from the adrenaline rush. "I keep thinking about what might have happened if the sheriff had not shown up," Nora said quietly. "But he did. But what if he had not? What if they had decided to start shooting? Then we would have fought, and we probably would have won. You are a good shot, and I am not bad myself. I do not want to have to shoot anyone. Neither do I, but I would to protect you, to protect us." Nora looked up at him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "When did this become an us? We have known each other less than 2 months. I do not know. Somewhere between you threatening me with a skillet and me kissing you on the porch, I guess. Does it matter? No, I suppose it does not." She smiled through her tears. "I love you, Thorne Carlyle. I did not plan to, and it is probably too soon, but I do." Thorne felt his heart expand in his chest, warm and full. "I love you too, Nora Jenkins. I think I have loved you since the moment you stood up to those rustlers to protect me." They kissed, and it felt like a promise, like a beginning. Outside, the wind picked up, carrying the first hints of winter snow. But inside the cabin, wrapped in each other's arms, Thorne and Nora were warm. Winter came early that year, with snow falling in late November and not letting up until March. Thorne and Nora were snowed in for weeks at a time, but they did not mind. They had each other, and they had supplies, and they had the cabin Thorne had worked so hard to repair. The roof did not leak. The walls kept out the wind, and the fireplace drew smoke cleanly. They spent the long, dark evenings reading to each other from the few books Nora owned, or playing cards, or just talking. Thorne told Nora about his dreams of someday owning his own ranch. A small spread where he could raise horses and cattle and build a real home. Nora told Thorne about her childhood in Ohio, about the little sister she had left behind when she moved west, about her hope that someday she could reconnect with her family. "You think they would accept me?" Thorne asked one night. "If you did right to them and they came to visit, do you think they would be happy that you are with someone like me? Someone like you? You mean someone kind and hardworking and good. Someone with no family, no property, no prospects. You have me," Nora said firmly. "And that is all that matters. Besides, you do have prospects. You are smart and skilled, and once the weather clears, you can get work at that ranch the sheriff mentioned. We can save money. Maybe someday buy our own place." "Our own place," Thorne repeated, liking the sound of it. "You would want that, to stay here in Montana with me. Where else would I go? This is home now. You are home." On Christmas Day, they exchanged simple gifts. Thorne had carved Nora a new handle for her cast iron skillet, the one she had threatened him with that first day. Nora had sewn Thorne a new shirt from fabric she had been saving, embroidering his initials on the pocket with careful stitches. "It is perfect," Thorne said, running his fingers over the embroidery. "Thank you. You are welcome. Though I feel like I got the better end of this deal. A skillet handle is not much compared to everything you have done for me." "Are you joking? You saved my life, Nora, multiple times. First from the rustlers, then from dying of exposure or loneliness or both. You gave me a reason to stop drifting and start living." "A skillet handle seems like small thanks for that." Nora kissed him, soft and sweet. "Merry Christmas, Thorne. Merry Christmas, love." As winter slowly gave way to spring, Thorne and Nora began making plans for the future. Thorne would ride to the Hartford ranch and ask about work. If he got hired, he would split his time between the ranch and the cabin, working to earn money while still helping Nora maintain their home. They talked about planting a bigger garden, maybe getting a milk cow, eventually saving enough to buy the land the cabin sat on. In March, when the snow finally melted enough to make travel possible, Thorne rode to the Hartford ranch. Samuel Hartford was a man in his 50s, weathered and stern-looking but with kind eyes. He listened as Thorne explained his situation, leaving out the details about the rustlers but being honest about his lack of recent work history. "You know horses?" Hartford asked. "Yes, sir. I grew up around them." "You know cattle?" "Some. I have worked roundups before." "You willing to work hard?" "Yes, sir." Hartford studied him for a long moment. "I will give you a trial period. 2 weeks. If you prove yourself, the job is yours at $30 a month plus room and board. But I am running a respectable operation here. I do not tolerate drinking, fighting, or slacking." "Understood, understood. But, sir, about the room and board, I would prefer to take my pay in cash and provide my own lodging. I have a cabin north of here." "The old trapper's cabin?" "Yes, sir. You live there with your wife." Thorne hesitated. The truth was complicated, and he did not want to get Nora in trouble with gossip, but lying seemed worse. "I live there with a woman named Nora Jenkins. We are not married, but we are building a life together." Hartford's eyebrows rose. "That is an unusual arrangement." "Yes, sir, but it is our arrangement and it works for us. I respect honesty, son, and I do not care much about what people do on their own time as long as it does not affect their work. You have a deal. Start Monday." Thorne rode back to the cabin feeling like he had won a victory. When he told Nora about the job, she threw her arms around him, laughing with joy and relief. "This is wonderful. We can start saving money, building up our supplies. Maybe by next winter we will be able to afford more stock or repairs for the shed, or maybe," Thorne said, pulling her close, "we could think about making this arrangement of ours more permanent." Nora pulled back to look at him. "What are you saying?" I am saying that I love you and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. And I know you said you were not ready for marriage, and if you are still not ready, that is fine. I can wait as long as you need. But Nora, I want you to know that when you are ready, I will be here. I will always be here. Tears streamed down Nora's face, but she was smiling. Ask me. What? Ask me properly. On your knee like a gentleman. Thorne laughed, a sound of pure happiness, and dropped to one knee right there in the middle of their cabin. He took Nora's hands in his, looking up at her with all the love he felt shining in his eyes. Nora Jenkins, will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband, your partner, your home? Will you build this life with me for as long as we both shall live? Yes, Nora said, dropping to her knees so she could kiss him. Yes, yes, yes. I thought I would never want to marry again, but Thorne, you have shown me what marriage should be. Not ownership, but partnership. Not control, but support. I want that with you. I want everything with you. They held each other on the floor of their cabin, laughing and crying and kissing, while outside the spring sunshine melted the last of the winter snow. They were young and poor and facing an uncertain future, but they had each other, and that was everything. They were married in early May by the preacher in Beaver, with Sheriff Carter and his wife standing as witnesses. Nora wore a simple blue dress she had made herself, and Thorne wore his new shirt with his initials embroidered on the pocket. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Thorne kissed his bride like she was the most precious thing in the world, because she was. After the ceremony, they had a small celebration at the general store, with cake provided by Mrs. Carter and well wishes from the handful of townspeople who had come to know them over the winter. Samuel Hartford was there with his wife, and he shook Thorne's hand firmly. You are a good man, Carlyle. You treat that wife of yours right. I intend to, sir. And Mrs. Carlyle, Hartford turned to Nora. My wife mentioned that she could use some help with sewing and mending around the ranch. If you are interested in some work, she would pay fair wages. Nora's face lit up. I would love that, thank you. As the sun set, Thorne and Nora rode back to their cabin, now officially theirs as they had signed papers to purchase the land with a loan from the bank. It would take years to pay off, but it was worth it to know that this place, this home they had built together, was truly theirs. That night, they made love for the first time as husband and wife, and it was tender and sweet, and everything Nora had been afraid she would never have. Afterwards, they lay tangled together in the bed, Thorne's arm around Nora's waist, her head on his chest. Are you happy? Thorne asked softly. Happier than I ever thought possible. You, more than happy. I am complete. For years, I felt like I was missing something, but I could never figure out what. Now I know it was you. You were what I was missing. We are going to have a good life, Thorne. I can feel it. We already do. The years that followed were not always easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, years when money was tight and the work never seemed to end. But through it all, Thorne and Nora had each other. They built their ranch slowly but steadily, adding cattle and horses, expanding the cabin into a proper house with 2 bedrooms and a real kitchen. In the spring of 1879, Nora gave birth to their first child, a boy with Thorne's dark hair and Nora's green eyes. They named him Samuel after the rancher who had given Thorne his first real job. Watching his son nurse at Nora's breast, Thorne felt a surge of love so intense it almost hurt. He is perfect, he whispered. He is ours, Nora corrected, smiling up at her husband. Our little family. 2 years later, a daughter arrived, with red hair and a stubborn streak a mile wide. They named her Clara, after Nora's mother. And 3 years after that, another son whom they called John for Thorne's father. The house was never quiet anymore, filled with the sounds of children laughing and playing and arguing. Thorne would come home from working the ranch and find Nora in the kitchen, flour in her hair and a baby on her hip, looking frazzled and beautiful. She would smile at him and he would kiss her and everything else would fade away for a moment. "I missed you today," she would say. "I missed you too," he would reply, "but I am home now." Home. The word that had once meant nothing to Thorne now meant everything. It was not just the house they had built, though that was part of it. It was not just the land they owned, though they were proud of every acre. Home was Nora's laugh and Samuel's questions and Clara's mischief and John's cuddles. Home was sitting on the porch at sunset, watching the children play in the yard. Home was Sunday dinners and Christmas mornings and ordinary Tuesday afternoons. Home was Nora, always and forever Nora, the woman who had saved him from more than just rustlers. She had saved him from a life of loneliness and drifting. She had given him purpose and love and a reason to come home every single day. Sometimes, when the children were asleep and the house was quiet, Thorne would lie in bed with Nora in his arms and think about that day in 1876, when his horse was shot out from under him. If someone had told him then that losing his horse would lead him to the love of his life, he would have laughed. But now he understood that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes. "What are you thinking about?" Nora would ask, always able to tell when his mind was wandering. "How lucky I am, how grateful. We are both lucky. I was so alone before you found me. I did not even realize how alone I was until suddenly I was not anymore. I did not find you. I stumbled into your life by accident. There are no accidents. You were meant to come to my cabin that day. We were meant to find each other." Thorne would kiss her then, still amazed after all these years that she was his. "I love you, Nora Carlyle. I love you too, Thorne. Always." By 1890, the Carlyle Ranch was one of the most successful in the region. They had a good reputation for quality stock and fair dealing. Samuel was 11, already showing signs of being as skilled with horses as his father. Clara was 9, with her mother's sharp mind and talent for numbers. John was 6, sweet and gentle, always bringing home injured animals for his mother to nurse back to health. Thorne and Nora would sit on their porch sometimes, watching their children and talking about how far they had come. From a broken-down cabin and 2 desperate people to a thriving ranch and a family full of love and laughter. It had taken hard work and sacrifice, and more than a few tears, but they had built something real and lasting. "Do you ever think about what might have happened if the rustlers had caught you that day?" Nora asked one evening. "Sometimes, but not often. I prefer to focus on what did happen. Which is, I found you, or you found me. Either way, we found each other, and that changed everything." "You became my reason to come home," Nora said softly, echoing something Thorne had said to her years earlier. "Before you, I was just surviving, just existing. But you gave me a reason to live fully, to hope, to love. You gave me a home, not just a house. You did the same for me. I had been homeless my whole life, even when I had a roof over my head. But you, Nora, you made me understand what home really means." They kissed as the sun set over the Montana plains, the same way they had kissed hundreds of times before and would kiss hundreds of times again. Their children played in the yard, the cattle lowed in the distance, and somewhere a coyote called to the rising moon. It was an ordinary evening in an ordinary life, which made it extraordinary. Because after years of drifting and loneliness and fear, both Thorne and Nora had found what they were looking for. Not in grand adventures or dramatic rescues, though there had been some of that too, but in the quiet, steady accumulation of days spent together. In morning coffee and evening walks and all the small moments in between, they had found home in each other, and that was the greatest adventure of all. Years continued to pass in a steady, comfortable rhythm. The children grew, each finding their own path. Samuel became a skilled rancher, eventually taking over more and more of the daily operations. Clara, with her head for figures, managed the books and proved to have a shrewd business sense that helped the ranch thrive even during lean years. John, true to his gentle nature, became a veterinarian, the first in the county, making his parents incredibly proud. When Samuel turned 20, he married a schoolteacher named Elizabeth, and they built a house on the eastern edge of the property. 2 years later, Clara married a lawyer from Beaver and moved to town, though she still came out every week to help with the accounts. John, at 18, left for veterinary school in the East, promising to return when his education was complete. Thorne and Nora found themselves in the strange position of being empty nesters, rattling around in a house that suddenly seemed too big. But they adapted, as they always had, finding new rhythms and rediscovering each other without the constant demands of parenthood. "It is strange," Nora said one evening as they sat on the porch, the same porch where they had shared so many conversations over the years. "I spent so much time wishing for a moment's peace when they were little, and now that we have peace, I find myself missing the chaos." "They are not gone," Thorne reminded her. "Samuel is just over the hill and Clara visits every week, and John will be back before we know it. I know, but it is not the same." "No, it is not. But Nora, we raised 3 incredible children. We built a successful ranch. We created a legacy. And now we get to enjoy it, together." Nora smiled, leaning her head on her husband's shoulder. "When did you get so wise? I married you, did I not? That was the wisest thing I ever did." In 1898, Samuel and Elizabeth made Thorne and Nora grandparents for the first time, with a daughter they named Nora after her grandmother. Thorne held his granddaughter for the first time and felt tears stream down his face, overwhelmed by the knowledge that this tiny person was part of his legacy, part of the family he and Nora had created. "She is beautiful," Nora whispered, looking over her husband's shoulder at the baby. "Absolutely perfect, just like her grandmother." More grandchildren followed. Clara had twins, a boy and a girl. John returned from school and married a rancher's daughter, and they had 3 boys in quick succession. The house filled up again during holidays and Sunday dinners, loud with children's laughter and the sounds of family. Thorne and Nora were in their 50s now, graying and slower than they once were, but still strong, still in love, still partners in every sense of the word. They would walk the property together in the evenings, hand in hand, talking about the past and the future and the beautiful present they were living in. "Sometimes I think about that day you showed up at my cabin," Nora said during one of these walks. "You were covered in dust and desperate, and I was so scared, but I made the right choice letting you stay. We both did. You could have turned me away and I could have kept running, but we chose each other instead. Best choice I ever made." "Second best," Thorne corrected. "Oh. What was the first?" "Saying yes when I asked you to marry me." Nora laughed, the sound as bright and warm as it had been 30 years earlier. "You are a romantic Thorne Carlyle, only for you." As the new century approached, the world was changing rapidly. There were automobiles in Beaver now, and talk of electricity coming to the rural areas. The Wild West of Thorne and Nora's youth was fading into memory, replaced by something more civilized and settled. But some things did not change. Love did not change. Family did not change. The Montana sky, stretching endlessly above their ranch, did not change. And the way Thorne looked at Nora, with devotion and tenderness and the kind of love that only deepened with time, that did not change either. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Thorne surprised Nora with a gift. He had spent months working on it in secret, with help from Samuel and John. When he led her out behind the house, her hand over her eyes, she gasped when he told her she could look. It was a garden, but not just any garden. Thorne had enclosed a large area with a white picket fence, and inside were rows of vegetables and herbs, but also flowers. So many flowers. Roses and daisies and sunflowers, and every variety he could find or trade for. In the center was a bench with their initials carved into the back, and a small sign that read Nora's Garden. "Thorne," Nora breathed, tears streaming down her face. "It is beautiful. Not as beautiful as you, but I wanted to give you something special, something that was just yours. You have spent 25 years making everyone else's life better. It is time someone did something for you." Nora kissed him, tasting salt from her own tears. "You do things for me every day, just by being you, by loving me the way you do. That is not a chore, Nora. Loving you is the easiest thing I have ever done." They sat on the bench together, surrounded by flowers, and talked about their life. About the hard times and the good times, about the children they had raised and the grandchildren who brought them so much joy. About how a chance meeting in an abandoned cabin had led to all of this. "If you could go back," Nora asked, "to that day when you burst through my door, would you do anything differently?" Thorne thought about it. "I would have kissed you sooner." Nora laughed. "That is your only regret." "Well, that and not telling you I loved you the first time I thought it, which was probably about 2 weeks after we met." 2 weeks, Thorne. What? You were beautiful and brave and stubborn, and you made terrible coffee but excellent cornbread. I was smitten. I did not make terrible coffee. Nora, love, your coffee could strip paint. It is a miracle I did not die of poisoning that first month. She swatted his arm, but she was laughing. "Well, your cooking was not much better. Remember those biscuits you made? We could have used them for building materials. They were not that bad." "They were terrible, but I ate them anyway because you made them for me, and that made them perfect." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their land. Their ranch, their home, the place where they had built a life together from nothing but love and determination and hard work. "We did good, did we not?" Nora asked softly. "We did great," Thorne corrected. "Look at what we have created, not just this ranch, but our family. Our children are good people, Nora. Kind and hardworking and decent. That is because of you, because of us," she corrected. "We did it together. Everything we have, everything we are, we built it together." "Together," Thorne agreed, pulling her close. "Always together." As they entered their 60s, Thorne and Nora began to slow down even more. Samuel had fully taken over the ranch operations, running it with the same integrity and care his father had taught him. Thorne still helped when he could, but more and more, his role became advisory rather than active. He did not mind. After decades of hard physical labor, he was content to sit on the porch and watch his son work, knowing that the legacy would continue, that everything he and Nora had built would endure. One evening in the spring of 1905, after a particularly beautiful day, Thorne and Nora sat on their porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard. There were 8 of them now, ranging in age from infant to teenager, and they filled the property with noise and energy. "Can you believe it?" Nora asked, her hand in Thorne's. "All of this from 2 desperate people in a broken-down cabin. I can believe it, because I have been living it every day for the past 29 years. 29 years. Where did the time go? Into this, into us, into them." Thorne gestured at the children. "I would not trade a single moment, Nora. Not the hard times, not the struggles, not the worries, because all of it led to this. To us sitting here, watching our grandchildren play, knowing that we built something that will outlast us." "You have become quite philosophical in your old age." "I've just had a lot of time to think. And mostly what I think about is how lucky I am that my horse got shot that day, that I ran in the right direction and found your cabin, that you did not bash my head in with that skillet." Nora laughed. "I considered it. I know you did. I saw it in your eyes. But then you looked at me with those eyes, all desperate and honest, and I thought, well, maybe I will give him a chance. Best decision you ever made." "Second best," she corrected with a smile. "The first was marrying you." They watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, the same sunset they had watched thousands of times before from this same spot. The land stretched out before them, their land, marked by years of work and care and love. "Thorne," Nora said softly. "Yes, love, thank you. For what? For everything. For being my partner, my best friend, my home. For giving me a family when I thought I would always be alone. For loving me every single day, even when I was difficult or scared or stubborn." "Especially when you were stubborn," Thorne said with a grin. "That is when I loved you most. I am serious, so am I." He turned to face her, taking both of her hands in his. "Nora, you saved my life that day, not just from the rustlers, but from myself. From a lifetime of drifting without purpose or connection. You gave me roots. You gave me a reason to stay, to build, to love. Everything good in my life came from you. So if anyone should be saying thank you, it is me. Then let us just say we are both grateful. For each other, for this life, for everything we have been blessed with. I can agree to that." They kissed as the last light faded from the sky, a soft, gentle kiss that held decades of love and commitment. Around them, their grandchildren squealed and played, and from inside the house came the sound of Elizabeth calling everyone in for supper. It was an ordinary evening, unremarkable in many ways. But it was also perfect, because it was theirs. A life built on love, sustained by partnership, enriched by family. That night, as they lay in bed, Nora curled against Thorne's side the way she had been doing for nearly 30 years. Thorne whispered into the darkness, "You know what the best part of every day is?" "What?" Nora murmured sleepily. "Coming home to you. It always has been, from that very first day. You have always been my reason to come home, Nora, and you always will be." Nora smiled, squeezing his hand. "And you are mine. Always have been, always will be." They drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other and in the life they had created. Outside, the Montana wind whispered through the grass, and the stars shone down on the ranch that two desperate, lonely people had transformed into a home. The years continued their march, bringing more changes and more blessings. More grandchildren arrived, and then great-grandchildren. The 20th century brought new technologies and new challenges, but through it all, Thorne and Nora remained constant. Their love, forged in desperation and hardship, proved unbreakable. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary surrounded by 4 generations of family. The party was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and more food than anyone could possibly eat. Thorne, now 76, and Nora, now 71, sat in places of honor, watching their family celebrate around them. "We did this," Nora said, squeezing Thorne's hand. "All of these people, they exist because we found each other. We built an empire, Mrs. Carlyle. Not of money or land, but of love. The only kind of empire worth having." Their eldest grandson, Samuel's boy, stood up to make a toast. "To my grandparents who showed all of us what real love looks like. Who built this ranch and this family through hard work and dedication and an unshakable commitment to each other. We are all here because of your love story. So here is to 50 more years." Everyone cheered, though Thorne and Nora just smiled at each other. They both knew that 50 more years was unlikely at their age, but that was all right. They had had 50 wonderful years together, and however many more they were granted would be a blessing. As the party wound down and family began leaving, heading back to their own homes and lives, Thorne and Nora found themselves alone on the porch once more. It was their spot, had been for decades, and they settled into their chairs with the ease of long habit. "Do you remember the first time we sat here together?" Nora asked. "Of course. It was after I fixed the roof. You had just asked me to stay, and I was trying not to show how happy that made me. You did not hide it very well. You had this ridiculous grin on your face. I was happy. I had found something I did not even know I was looking for." "What was that?" "Home. You, same thing, really." Nora leaned over and kissed his weathered cheek. "You are still a romantic, even after all these years." "Only for you, Nora, only ever for you." They sat in comfortable silence as night fell and the stars came out, the same stars they had watched together for 5 decades. The land around them was quiet now, peaceful. Their legacy was secure. Their children and grandchildren were thriving, and they had each other. "Thorne," Nora said softly. "Yes, love, I think I am ready to go inside now." "All right, let me help you up." He stood and extended his hand, and she took it, letting him pull her to her feet. They were both slower now, their bodies marked by age and hard living, but they moved together with the synchronicity of people who had been partners for a lifetime. As they walked inside, Thorne's arm around Nora's waist and hers around his, they passed by the photographs that lined the walls. Their wedding day, young and hopeful. Their children at various ages, growing up too fast. Their grandchildren, smiling and happy. The ranch through the seasons, changing and growing but always home. They got ready for bed with the easy intimacy of a long marriage, and when they finally lay down, Nora immediately curled into Thorne's side, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her. "I love you, Thorne Carlyle," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too, Nora, more than words can say. You are my home, my heart, my everything. You always have been, from the moment I stumbled into your cabin all those years ago. We have had a good life, have we not? The best life, because I spent it with you." They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other and in the love that had sustained them through 50 years of marriage and nearly 60 years since that fateful day when a desperate cowboy had burst into an abandoned cabin and found salvation in the form of a fierce woman with a cast-iron skillet. Outside, the wind whispered through the Montana plains, carrying with it the stories of 1,000 lives lived and loved. But none of those stories was quite like the story of Thorne and Nora, two lonely souls who found each other and built a love that would echo through generations. They lived many more years, each day a gift, each moment precious. And when Thorne finally passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82 with Nora holding his hand, his last words were simple and true. "I am home. I have always been home because I have always had you." Nora lived 3 more years without him, surrounded by her family and sustained by their memories. She spent her days in the garden Thorne had built for her, telling anyone who would listen about the day a desperate cowboy had burst into her cabin and changed her life forever. When she died at 85, also peacefully in her sleep, her grandchildren found a letter she had written, meant to be read at her funeral. In it, she told the story of how she and Thorne had met, how they had fallen in love, how they had built a life together from nothing but hope and determination and love. The letter ended with these words: "People used to ask me how I could live alone in that cabin, so far from civilization, so isolated. But I was not alone. I had hope and I had myself, and eventually I had Thorne. He became my reason to come home every day, even though we were already home together. Love is like that. It makes wherever you are into home and whoever you are with into family. Thorne and I found each other when we both needed saving, and we spent the rest of our lives saving each other every single day. That is what love is. That is what marriage should be. Two people choosing each other every day, no matter what. I am grateful for every moment we had together, and I am grateful to be joining him now. Because wherever Thorne is, that is home, and I have been away from home long enough. They buried Nora next to Thorne on a hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together, with a simple headstone that read, Thorne and Nora Carlyle, partners in life, partners in love, together always. The ranch continued for generations after, passed down through their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. But everyone who worked that land, or lived in that house, or walked those fields knew the story of how it all began. With a lonely cowboy and a desperate woman, and a chance meeting in an abandoned cabin that changed both of their lives forever. It was a love story for the ages, proof that sometimes the worst moments can lead to the best outcomes, and that home is not a place but a person. For Thorne, home had always been Nora, and for Nora, home had always been Thorne. Together, they had created something beautiful and lasting, something that would endure long after they were gone. They had created a legacy of love, and that was the greatest achievement of all. And if you visited that ranch today, you would still see evidence of their love story everywhere. In the house Thorne had repaired with his own hands, in the garden he had built for Nora, still blooming every spring. In the faces of their descendants, carrying forward the values and love that Thorne and Nora had instilled in every generation. But most of all, you would feel it. That sense of home, of belonging, of love that transcends time and death. Because some loves are too strong to ever truly end. They linger in the land and the air, and the hearts of those left behind. Thorne and Nora's love was that kind of love, the forever kind, the kind that becomes legend and inspiration, the kind that makes people believe in happy endings and true partnership, and the possibility of finding your home in another person. It was a love that started in desperation and grew into something extraordinary. A love that proved that it is never too late to find your person, your place, your purpose. A love that showed generations what commitment and partnership and choosing each other every day really looks like. It was the love story of a lonely cowboy and the woman who became his reason to come home. And it was perfect,